Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Learn with Jason. And I'm just realizing now that I've pointed my camera in the wrong direction. So we're just going to fix that. So I'm standing in the middle of the frame. Today on the show, we have Brian LeRoux. Brian, how you doing?
Good. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. I'm so happy to have you here. I think this is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
We are doing one of my favorite things, which is like playing with new tech that is old tech. And that's my favorite kind of tech. And so I'm really excited to talk about that. But before we dive into exactly what we're working on today, let's talk a little bit about you. So do you want to give a background for folks who aren't familiar with your work?
Yeah, sure. I'm a co-founder of Begin.com. In a former life, a long time ago, I was one of those early freaks that got into JavaScript when JavaScript wasn't cool. I spoke at the very first JS Conf, which was in like 2008 or 9, I can't remember. I did a thing called WTFJS, which some people have seen around on the internet. I helped co-create a thing called PhoneGap. I helped open source that as Apache Cordova. Eventually got acquired by Adobe. I helped work on Creative Cloud and scaling that up from
Hmm.
on-premises into both AWS and Azure before I left. And at that point, I got burned out on load balancing monoliths and got into Cloud Functions. And that's when I started doing the Begin thing. So yeah, I've been hanging around for since the 90s doing this stuff. And yeah, I'm stoked to be here. So thanks for having me.
Yeah. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. And as a fellow grizzled JavaScript from back in the days of DHTML dev, I feel
Yeah.
like we've got a lot of the same battle scars and a lot of the same formative experiences, which always makes for a fun, like back in my day kind of conversation.
Totally. And I mean, we're in one of those moments right now, so it's cool to talk about the resurgence of maybe older practices are coming back and
Yes,
why.
and
Like that.
yeah, and so this is something that I think is really interesting, where we've got this resurfacing or reemergence of interest in plain HTML, in no JavaScript, in stuff that I think for a long time we had written off as like not practical for day-to-day use. And we're seeing this come up all over the place from frameworks like Astro that are trying to compile away all the JavaScript. There's no JavaScript at all if you don't turn it on explicitly, or
Love that. Yeah.
a lot of like surging interest in 11D, which is the kind of OG compiler. You've got like frameworks like Preact that are trying
Remix.
to absolutely minimize. Remix, going back to web standards, is like the prime. MDN is your primary documentation for Remix, which I think is really fascinating. So,
Yeah.
and now we're going to talk today about Enhance, which is another framework in this general mindset of like use the platform. So
Hmm.
I feel like we've seen use the platform go from being kind of it was like a joke for a while. I remember 5 years ago or so, you would see people say use the platform almost as like the satirical hashtag to make fun of people who said use the platform. And
Yeah.
it is very
Yeah.
different now. Today, when people are saying use the platform, it is said very earnestly and with no like rancor attached to it at all. It's very much like, no, the platform is pretty awesome. So
It's
what have
funny how
you
that works.
seen? What have you seen that like made this happen? Why do you think we've made the shift so recently?
Oh man, there's so many forces at play here. So to understand why not using the platform became a thing, I think we got to rewind all the way to mobile. And
Yes.
so the early web was desktop only because using the internet on the phone was a fantasy. And then eventually it kind of became a thing a little bit, but it was always really janky until that iPhone came out in 2007. And when that happened, it was a sea of change. And one of the big things that happened at the moment where we realized that our websites suck on mobile. And so we wanted to
Mm-hmm.
like work on that and make them better. And one way to make them better was to not have a long transition between page reloads. And back then, you have to remember too, it was like 3G speeds were considered like state of the art fast.
Right.
That was as good as it was going to get. 3G was not fast. And so when you navigated between pages, you really felt that transition. It
Yes.
felt clunky. And so SPAs started to rise up as an architecture that would hopefully help facilitate making better web experiences. PWAs were kind of a result of that,
Mm-hmm.
and for the most part, I think they did an okay job. Not great, but an okay job. But in the meantime, a lot's changed. So back then, if you wanted to have a presence on the web, chances are you would set up a web server if it was a dynamic app. You needed to. You can't have things like personalization without a database. So it was really hard and kind of slow. But it turned out a lot of apps could be built completely on the client with all the business logic on the client, and they wouldn't be as slow, and they could have like a good transition story. So SPAs got really popular because of mobile, but mobile didn't stop improving, and neither did
Mm-hmm.
back end technology. So mobile's now, a lot better than it was, but not evenly distributed. I'd say most of the Earth is probably on 3G or slower speeds, which is something to keep in mind from an audience perspective. And the other thing to keep in mind is that we don't need to run fleets of web servers to get a dynamic process anymore. So we
Mm-hmm.
can use a cloud function instead, and it's going to have characteristics really similar to static sites, at least as far as deployment goes, which was usually the big complaint about servers. So
Mm-hmm.
just put a zip file somewhere, and then magic happens, and it gets invoked magically. And no matter how much traffic happens, it'll get invoked, and you'll only pay for what you use, and that's great. So we've now come kind of full circle where it's like, do I need to build an SPA? Does it need to be static? And those lines are blurring, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I have other aspects around the technology that are kind of pointing towards multi-page apps. Not just the fact that the frameworks are all sort of jumping on this, but um, the specs for the browser continue to improve. So we've got the shared element transitions API. There's a popular demo going around where it's like a movie selector, and it's like
Mm-hmm.
really cool, big, heavy animations, or it's like you select something, it comes into a full screen, and it's great. And all of that is just CSS. There's no
Right.
JavaScript involved, which is, a couple of years ago, that was science fiction to think that we could do that. Now it's behind a flag in Chrome, and there's not a lot of distance between that and being able to do a multi-page transition. And once that hits, the likelihood of us compiling these big bundles and doing this SPA thing is pretty low. Like, we're not
You
going to
know,
want to have that overhead.
and I even saw somebody was sharing there's like an intent to ship about multi-page transitions. So it's now like in motion.
Yeah.
It's coming.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's great, right? Like, I love that this is something that's been very consistent in the last decade, but not always, where we see the browser really driving forward. There was a dark period where there was no innovation in the browser, and it looked like it was going to be a dead platform. But
Mm,
thankfully, Firefox held on long enough for other browsers to emerge, like Chrome, and change that story. And now Chrome's really pushing other browsers into the future, whether they want to go there or not. And it's I'm not going to name any names on that one, but it's nice to see. And everyone is, pushing that innovation really hard. Like, I never thought I'd say this, but Microsoft is now a leader of the web, and
you
it's
know,
great.
it's funny because they you see these sort of shifts and everything in terms of innovation. And I think when in the days of Internet Explorer, you would see Microsoft as like one of the reasons the web was hard to work with. And
Yeah,
once they shipped Edge and they put Edge on Chromium, and you can tell that like the ethos has shifted, and they're really invested in the web and open source with the acquisition of GitHub, with the maintenance of VS Code. And it's clear that
yeah.
they've shifted their strategy. They're really making a community based play. And
Satya Nadella is a literal genius and doesn't get enough credit. He made an elephant dance, and usually when you see a company on its backslide, that's kind of it's really hard to correct. It's like an avalanche, and you've got tens of thousands of people's inertia pushing in this sort of anti-open source direction, and that company couldn't be any more different today. And I think it
absolutely.
reflects in their market cap. They
Oh yeah.
they listened, and they responded, and they're creating really great products for the web. That's for sure.
It's been really impressive to see. Yeah, I've been super impressed by the just the full about face in the presentation, like, the positioning of Microsoft One has been incredible to watch shift. And then also
Yeah.
the actual ethos, like when you talk to Microsoft employees, it's very different from my experience talking to Microsoft employees in the early 2000s.
Oh, big time. And it's not just talk, they're shipping all the time. We're getting new versions of just about every part of the stack now from Microsoft, and some of them are even really good.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I don't know, like between GitHub, Visual Studio Code, and TypeScript, I think they probably have a stranglehold on something like 90 million developers. So that is an incredible achievement considering that like not that long ago, you would not have associated Microsoft with this level of innovation and contribution to the web and open source. So it's
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. So then, so browsers have drastically improved. Like I think, my
Yeah.
first introduction to JavaScript development was when it used to be called DHTML, and I
Yes.
remember trying to build some
Back
some
then,
dynamic
VBScript was
features.
valid too.
Yeah,
People
right.
were
Or like I think
people would do that
I was writing
on
Flash. I
purpose.
was doing all sorts of
Yeah.
interesting stuff, trying to make anything dynamic on my site. And I
Yeah.
remember that like the reason that I would write Flash was because JavaScript was so hard to make work between Internet Explorer and Netscape Navigator. And
Totally.
you would write something and it would kind of work on Internet Explorer, and then you would move over to Netscape and it just didn't work. And you just kind of
CSS
had to make a
too.
choice on which thing
Yeah.
you were going to support. I remember you would get like the overlay. It was just like, hey, this site only works on Internet Explorer. Like, go over there, right? And so when I saw something like jQuery, I feel like jQuery unlocked something magical where John Reisig and the rest of the team had done this incredible work to make something cross-browser. They'd done
Yeah.
all of the necessary effort to smooth over the inconsistencies and make sure that if you wrote JavaScript on one browser, it would work in every browser. And I think they carried that torch that led to Angular and Backbone and Knockout and React and all these other frameworks that were basically like, hey, the platform's not doing what you need it to do, but we did the work to what's the right word? Homogenize, to even
Yeah.
out the
Or
inconsistencies on the platform so that you can just write the
sand down the
apps.
rough edges. Yeah.
Exactly, right? And so we ended up with this what I would say the ethos of the 2010s is browsers don't care about apps. You need JavaScript if you want to build an app. Right? That was it.
Yeah.
You kind of just reached for a framework because you knew that you had to smooth over all these browser inconsistencies. That's how you end up with like the VDOM in React, the synthetic elements in React, or synthetic events in React, and all these different pieces that were basically like a lot of code to make sure that things behaved consistently across all the different platforms they'd be deployed to.
Yeah, and the browsers were, their own worst enemies back then. So like we had but like evergreen is a thing now, and evergreen's a nice way of saying the browser updates itself, and we totally just take this for granted. We're just like,
Mm,
yeah, latest version of Chrome, of course you launched it. But that did not used to be the case. It used to be you'd have whatever version came with the OS, and likely that was IE 5 or something, and your parents weren't downloading a new version of IE. It was you
right.
on Christmas morning, and that was horrible. And so, as a web developer, we were really our hands were tied. If we wanted to support a feature, we would have to basically go to the lowest common denominator. And
Right.
then around the time of, I think it was JSConf like 2011, maybe 12, Jeremy Ashkanis shipped CoffeeScript, and it was this revelation that we could use Turing completeness to use JavaScript to write JavaScript that was down compiled to the lowest common denominator, so we didn't have to put up with that shit. And
Mm,
sorry, excuse me, put up with that trash. And so we ended up with transpilers, and I thought that was at the time it was like this dark magic where it's like, how does this even work? Like I'm running like all this fancy new HTML5y stuff, but it's on like these older browsers. I kind of feel like we lost the plot there though, and we got a little too infatuated with Turing completeness, and now
mm.
we're just creating compilation paths for the sake of it rather for reasons. The reasons tend to be because it looks better, and it's like, well, that's aesthetics, just an opinion, but it's good. And I think that led us down the road where we were like, wow, we can make JavaScript better with JavaScript, and we have been fixing the platform in spite of the browsers for a lot of years. But in the meantime, the browsers did catch up, and now
Right.
they're in a place that's pretty amazing. And a lot of the things that we used to complain about are actually just built in. And
Yes.
sometimes we don't even realize that and take it for granted. And this all happened kind of messy. Like it wasn't like here you go, beautiful ES6 syntax. It was this slow, painful, incremental browser by browser rollout. I remember it wasn't that long ago where I had errors in Node because somebody wrote a module that used const,
Mm,
but Node didn't have the updated version of V8,
right.
and we couldn't update that version of Node because it was running on a server, and it was just like a mess. And we're like, well,
Yes.
now I got to go and like compile this other thing to have a let because const
Well,
isn't here, and like,
and like this was
yeah,
I think the magic of that age, like, because you had, so like jQuery, right, got this I think undeserved bad reputation as being a unnecessary tool or whatever. And what I think
yeah,
people leave behind is that like jQuery made it possible for the platform to normalize. It tested
yeah,
things like query selector syntax and got us all thinking
yes,
in a similar way so that we could then go in and do these things. And once jQuery was mostly built into the browser, then we started seeing different inconsistencies. So what you're talking about with like the advancement of JavaScript not being consistent with Node and so on and so forth, then we saw like
yeah,
Webpack and Babel come in, and Grunt
yeah,
and Gulp and etc. before that. But like Webpack and Babel were really where I feel like the magic started, because Babel introduced this idea that you could write the modern JavaScript and they'd just fix it for you, and they would compile down to
yeah.
whatever set of browser targets you told it to. And suddenly we were off to some pretty interesting races where we could innovate without all of this pain. And like you
Yes.
said, we were using JavaScript to write JavaScript and kind of doing that for the sake of it's fun and not necessarily because it was the best thing to do. But I mean, you can confirm if you agree with my suspicion here. But I think that the reason that we're seeing this swing back to web standards now is that we have the convergence of good timing from the browsers, where a lot of the things that we needed,
Yeah.
like React or Angular or something to smooth over, are now supported in the browsers natively.
Yeah.
And the JavaScript ecosystem has normalized enough that you can now write just JavaScript and you don't necessarily need Babel or Webpack or things like that anymore, because the platforms have evened out. And that creates this sort of ideal moment to say, okay, we can thank all of these tools that were so useful to get us here and start looking at where we go next now that these tools are no longer necessary.
That's the question, and I love that encapsulation of it because I think it's a perfect way to look at it. And this isn't there's another aspect to this that's really important for people to understand, and that computing isn't this zero sum thing. So jQuery's success, didn't mean that there couldn't be a React. Of course, it precipitated the React
Right.
thing happening, and likewise, other technologies becoming successful won't make the existing ones go away. So that it doesn't like, this isn't some death knell for Next.js and React and those tools, but it's super worth asking, just worth asking. Maybe could I do this without these tools? And I think in a
Mm-hmm.
lot of cases it's very possible. For probably most cases, you can get a lot of these affordances without any third-party tooling, without a transpiling step that obfuscates your code, and without having to wait for a build, which is really wonderful
And
and worth looking at.
and so I'm going to use that as like the least subtle transition of all time. But let's talk about enhance.
Sure. Yes. Yeah, it was a good build up to it, and I think it's perfect. So this was the sort of question we were asking with Enhance. I've been focused mostly on how do we make backend dev better for the
Mm-hmm.
past few years. And we have a framework called Architect. It lets you build with cloud functions. We have a very specific way of building that we call functional web apps, which is essentially building apps purely out of cloud functions. So no servers here, kind of development. And what would that mean? And how does that change our development world? But the whole time we were doing that, everyone kept asking us like, okay, cool, backend's all cloud functions, but how should I do my front end? And we'd say, I don't know, however you want. And people would say, well, did you just tell me to go F myself? And we're like, no, man, like you can just do whatever, like that public folder is sitting there waiting for you to compile something or not. And they're like, well, how do you do it? Like, well, we return HTML and we progressively enhance it. They look at me like I was a lizard. It's like, no, I'm serious. And they're like, you can't do that. Like, why not? You can return JSON text, you can return HTML, same thing. And that idea was generally considered a little bit nuts, but we persisted with that line for a lot of years, and then actually, I think we were talking to Matt Billaman about this a little while ago. He's like, "What are you guys going to do?" And we're like, "We're thinking we're going to do a front end framework," and he's like, "That's a terrible idea." And I know where he's coming from. So like in my former life and the PhoneGap project, we were always like, don't pick a framework because there's a new one every week, and if you go into that fight, then you're going to die in that fight. And that was pretty common knowledge. And generally, I think this is the philosophy of Netlify, where it's like create a big tent, don't get involved in that drama because it's an ever changing thing, and people will always claim, oh, now it's stabilized, but there's another 6 frameworks behind that last one. And that's okay. We want diversity. We want selection. We want options. We want to have lots of choices. So like, that's a good thing. We're not trying to create a monoculture. But we did keep running into the same question. And so eventually we were like, okay, cool. We're going to package it up and we're going to show you how we would build the front end for a functional web app and what that looks like. And that became Enhance. And so the fast bullets of what Enhance it's file-based routing built on cloud functions using web components and web standards. And that's it. So if you want to try and build an application today, most people are going to reach for a component library of some kind. They might reach for a React or Svelte. We're suggesting that maybe HTML can do that job, and it's worth exploring. And maybe it won't. Maybe it'll fall apart on you, and you'll have to jump into React. But at least for the first step, you should try and build it with HTML and see what happens, because you'll probably be pleasantly surprised. And you know what? You will run into a situation where you're going to need to update that DOM, and that's the moment to grab React, and rather than starting with it.
Yes, I think that's very much becoming my operating philosophy as well, is that you need to ask what problem you're solving. Like, I feel like we've made a little bit of a mistake in the community, where we've all looked at frameworks as being like the foundation of our skill set. Like, I am a React developer or a Next developer or a Vue developer or whatever it is. And I've always thought of it more as like, I build for the web, and I really like writing CSS, as the chat can attest. I really like writing HTML. I really like getting into JavaScript, whether that's one of the framework flavors or just writing some just plain old JavaScript. I have fun doing it all, and I identify as a web developer, not a like certain type of web developer. And to me, that feels, I mean, obviously, like, because it's what I've chosen, like, I am objectively correct, but I think there's, but I think there's something there's something to be said about like understanding that what we're trying to do is create great web experiences, not create the perfect React app or whatever it is, right? Like, because there's no such thing. Like, every app we build is going to be janky in certain places. We're going to miss some edge cases. We're going to get stuff wrong. And so if we look to our frameworks to save us, we're kind of all waiting for Superman, and that's not going to solve. Like, you can't wait for a hero. You need to just learn that, like, it's messy and you got to wade in, and it's always going to be an uphill battle. And any framework is going to maybe solve this edge case, but it'll introduce other edge cases, and you're never going to be like 100% done. And at the bottom of it all, you're going to write some HTML, some CSS, and some JavaScript to solve those edge cases. because that's how it works. I mean, we're watching that happen in React right now with the rollout of the hooks, where they solved a bunch of corner cases, and then people found a bunch more, and now they're doing education to solve for the corner cases, but that's exposing
Yeah.
more. And I think it's causing a lot of frustration because people were like, wait, Dan Abramov, you were supposed to save us. And you know, that's not really how this works.
Yeah. There's a quote by a guy named, I think, Eric Savard. I should know this off the top of my head, but the quote goes, "The chief cause of problems is solutions." And I love that because it's so true. And like, I have a pinned tweet on my profile that builds on that idea, where I say, you know, the best solution to a problem isn't a solution, it's to eliminate the conditions of that problem. And so it's a subtle thing, but as we add tools, as we add solutions, as we add dependencies,
Mm,
tools are dependency. We're creating vectors for new unforeseen problems because we're creating a more and more complex system. And we get taught early on that it's like, oh, you use this tool for that problem and this tool for that problem, and we just sort of think and learn that like our our industry likes to pretend we're doing engineering, but engineering is not picking the most popular thing. That's not how this works here, or else we'd still be building stone castles because those were popular, right? So everyone builds a
right.
stone castle. We don't do that. So engineering is identifying the problem. I try either trying to eliminate the conditions of that problem or solving that problem in such a way that is better than before, and not adding to the problems that you didn't know you had. So you know, if we were objective, we would do bake-offs more often. We would like measure performance and latency. We wouldn't look at the marketing material or um, GitHub stars. Like those aren't going to solve your problem. And there's safety in numbers. So I understand why people do this. That like, you know, what's the most popular thing, and that's usually a pretty safe way to act. But if you're trying to be an engineer, you'll probably want to invite some rigor into your selection criteria and treat this as an engineering exercise and not a big deal, and especially not a part of your identity. Because if you attach your identity to a framework, you're going to be that, you know, prototype JS guy. What the hell?
Well,
No one uses that anymore. And it's like,
and I think the other thing too is, you know, if we're talking about being in for the long game, right? Like there's short-term success to be had by jumping on the next trend and like becoming the premier expert in the next thing. But that sort of sets you up for a series of sprints where you're gonna figure out the new thing, and then you're gonna learn the new thing, and then you'll ride that wave, and then that wave dies down, and then you got to run to the next thing and do it again. And then
yeah,
there's more of like a marathon approach that's not as flashy, but like, okay, I'm going to couch this with a big old caveat, because I'm not implying that you have to learn things the way that I say you should learn them. Please don't take that as what I'm
yeah,
trying to do here. But what I have found in my own like heavily survivorship bias riddled experience is that taking the time to learn the fundamentals has made my career feel less panicky. Like when I'm seeing people talk
sure,
about,
yeah,
like, you know, when React was on the rise, I was like, cool, let's find out what this is all about. And now people are talking about like, I don't know, maybe is like, are we looking at what comes after React? And I'm like, bring it on. I'm so excited. I can't wait to see what people come up with,
yeah,
instead of worrying that my livelihood's going to go away because I hitched my whole wagon to any particular tool or any particular
yeah,
concept.
yeah. And we should be okay with debating ideas, right? Like we should be cool with skepticism, and we should also be cool with like, you know, embracing the diversity and all the bonuses that come with that. So like we can, you know, take a sprint and try out solid, compare it to Svelte, look at the, you know, adding a bug to each of those and seeing what it's like to resolve it. How are the
Mm-hmm.
docs? You know, what is the
Yes.
licensing like? How's the cadence of releases? Do they ship lots of breaking changes that are going to create unplanned work? These are all like objective questions. They're not insults or anything. You can just like, if you're a dev shop and you're on the hook to deliver on a
Right.
fairly decent cadence, which typically most of us are, you know, having unplanned work due to breaking changes because one of my dependencies decided to change something is a major bummer. That hurts my cadence and hurts my ability to get my job done and go home at 5. So there's and it's tricky because like we also want to be like, stoked about all this stuff. We don't want to be like a bummer and make people feel bad about their choices. And it's a very delicate line to walk.
Mm-hmm.
And the other little bit about what you were saying that I want to key into, there's a controversial topic around what are fundamentals. Lori, boss at Netlify, has an awesome presentation about what's going on in the world, and he always likes to like rag on this, how there is no fundamentals, because if there were, you just keep driving down to teaching sand to think or whatever. And and I get it, like he's not wrong. So like there's problems with like saying full stack too. Like, what is
Mm-hmm.
that? Like I've been doing this for a really long time, and I can stand up a fleet of web servers, no problem. But like, I would hesitate to call myself full stack, which is kind of funny because you see a lot of devs out there who are like full stack. It's like that's a static website. Okay, and you don't want to trash on anyone, but like where are we in this world? And this is a challenge because we don't know, and this makes it hard for us to understand like where to go and what to build
Right.
because there's no right or wrong answer here. I do think though, like even if fundamentals do or don't exist,
Mm.
the basics do. And so like I would consider HTML and CSS our basics in our craft. When you start learning to program these days, you most likely are going to stand up a website. And the first thing you'll get taught is probably a paragraph tag. And you'll do a little hello world and you'll see it on the screen and you'll be hooked. You'll be like, wow, thank God, I can change this screen. I can add pixels to a page. And that is a snowballing effect that is wonderful and amazing. And we quickly lose the plot though. We keep starting picking tools, but like I heard this the other day where someone's like, I don't know about web components because like there's more React developers. Like I'm pretty sure there's more HTML developers than React developers. Like you're going to have to learn HTML in order to understand what JSX is. So it's a bit of a facetious argument, anyways. Like who cares? If they don't know Svelte, teach them. Buy them some courses and learn
That's
it.
I think that has been a big part for me is recognizing that it's like anyone can learn these skills, right? Like the thing
Yeah.
that's harder to teach is actually pragmatism and a willingness to have these discussions and a willingness to like work with a team and not just dogmatically push for like I know thing so we'll do
Yes.
thing. I watched Scott Hanselman speak at All Things Open a couple weeks
It's
back, and
amazing.
there was this quote where he said, do you have 30 years of experience or do you have the same year of experience 30 times? And I think about that a lot because it's
That should keep you up at night.
I
Yes.
mean, yeah,
Everyone
right?
listening,
Like,
that question should keep you up at night because it's a good one. Have I been spinning my tires for 30 years?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, right. And I think that if you're out there trying to learn, you're out there trying to grow, you're not stagnant. But I do think it's interesting to see where have we looked at our own career development and said, okay, I'm done. I don't need to learn anything more about that.
Yeah, never, right? And
And
wouldn't that would be horrible.
but I do think that
Like,
it can be tempting, right? Like we do this with certain parts of our lives all the time because there's not enough hours in the day, right? So we're always making choices
yeah,
on what we want to optimize for. And
sure.
sometimes it can be really tempting to optimize for like ultra deep specialization in one very narrow band. And that is a really valuable skill. I had a whole
Totally.
conversation at Jamstack Conf with the front end happy hour team about like what that means and the difference between being a specialist and a generalist and how that plays into different aspects of your career. I don't have the text of that, or I'll share. I'll tweet it when it's out if anybody wants to hear that. But it was a good conversation, and I don't want to rabbit hole too hard because we are
That's a
at
double-edged sword, though,
it
and
is.
something to call out on this one. There were a really large amount of disaffected Flash and Flex developers, and they were
Mm-hmm.
mad,
Oh
and
yeah.
they got betrayed, and that was a disaster for them financially, and so like there is a thing to lock in, and there
Mm-hmm.
is a thing to making a bad bet and paying for it in the fullness of time. So, this is another reason for me to be really bullish on the web always, because those
Yeah.
skills are always going to be with us as long as the web is, and I'm pretty sure it's going to outlive most of us. So it's a good one to bet on. A company's proprietary compiler, there's not a great track record there. So
Yeah,
it's,
right. And like we'll see the influence of that compiler in the next compiler. And so learning those
yes,
things is valuable. It's all stackable bricks that get you to where you want to go. But yeah, like the more timeless something is, the less of it you have to relearn every 3 or 4 years. And
yeah,
I've found that the thing that keeps paying me back over and over and over again is the time that I spent maybe 10 years ago really digging into like, what is JavaScript? What is, like, how does document dot something work? What's happening when I'm writing like those little pieces of the actual like HTML, JavaScript, CSS spectrum that I spent time learning serve me in every single framework I step into. And some of that stuff is really, really valuable in the sense that like I have a like deep,
you can debug.
yeah, right. And like
You
my
know what's
my
going
React
on.
knowledge is super
Yeah.
transferable as I'm starting to look at things like Solid or Preact or so on and so forth. It's really easy for me to
Yes.
step into those frameworks. So I'm getting a lot of value from each of those things that I learn. But okay, we are at we've got about 50 minutes left, and I want to make sure that
Oh,
we've
yeah.
got
We should
plenty
get
of
into
time
it. Yeah.
to code. So I'm going to flip us over into the pair programming view.
Fun.
So let's do that. Here we are. Camera two. Okay, so so the first thing that I want to do is I am going to just do a quick shout out to the captioning. We have Diane with us today, taking down all these words, and it's on the homepage of the site, so you can go and check that out if you want to follow
That's so
along
great.
textually.
Thank you, Diane.
And
That's
we are
wonderful.
talking to
Nice.
twitter.com/Brian LeRoux. Oh, I'm so glad I got that right on the first try.
Yeah, I'm
So
impressed.
go
I
go
don't
give
get it right every time.
Brian a follow on Twitter. Lots of good insights there, and you can follow up on Architect Framework, on enhance.dev, all sorts of good things going on there. And we are specifically talking today about enhance.dev. And so
Yes.
this is the framework. This is a very like web standards based framework that is, as you said, your attempt to kind of pull your ideas around what a functional web app should look like into a reusable framework.
Yeah.
So typically, if I was going to get started, I know you've got a quick start here that I could follow, but I'm going to ignore all of that, use you as my quick start. What should I do
Cool.
first?
So the quick start is kind of generic, and I'm going to recommend scrolling down a little bit and clicking on deployment in the left nav bar. And there's like a begin or deploy with begin.
Okay,
Yeah, the second one. And the reason I'm going to get you to do this is because it's going to give you a generator and we won't have to do as much typing.
got it.
Um, so we're very old school node developers, and a lot of us have built things in this incredibly modular fashion, which is a double-edged sword. So there's lots of ways to consume Enhance. You can consume it as an npm module. You can consume it as a binary, and then the begin CLI gives you like all these. We basically ripped off all of Rails generators. Okay, so did that install for you?
Yes, and I need to
Oh,
move
yeah.
this. I'm gonna take my Z shell off screen because I can't remember what's in it. Just don't want to.
That
I
is a
don't
good
think I
call.
put anything in there that I would need to worry about, but let's.
I've made that mistake. All right.
So I am exporting more paths, and here we go. All right, so I remembered how to exit Vim. We're in great shape. All right, so bringing this back over. Okay, so we did that. I'm going to source my Z shell one more time. And now I should have begin. There it is. All right.
Yay.
So we can do a
So
begin
if you,
version. I'm using, oh wait, I did verbose. So I need to type
oh
out
yeah,
version.
it's fine. I think it always prints the version at the bottom.
062. Oh, it was right here, 062.
Yeah, you're on the latest. So there's a little mini quick start in there. And I think it's just, yeah, begin new, give it a name of some kind.
Okay, and it's going to create the folder for me.
I think so.
Begin new. Yeah. All right. So let's
We'll
do.
find out. We'll learn together.
So I'm just going to put it under enhance. And it is installing my dependencies for me. And now if I go if I go into here, we can see it's there. I'm going to
And I
get
think
in
you
it.
can just, yeah. And I
And
think you can
then
just run begin dev in there, and now you should see like a little howdy happy screen. So people always ask us, might as well get through this now. The little character is an axolotl. It's it's a salamander of some kind, and but he flies and farts rainbows. Um, we're going
love
to
it.
build up this whole mythology around the axolotl. Anyway, so that's it. You're at the home page. So maybe let's go take a look at the source that generated. I can walk you through what those files are all about.
All right. So I'm going to stop this. I'm going to open up VS Code and we'll pull this up here. They just did this thing where they like changed the way that this works, and I love it, and also I'm very confused by it. All right, so here we go with we've got. Oh wow!
I use you convinced me to move my file tree, by the way.
Yes,
I
another
moved it a little
convert.
bit right now. Yes. I saw I was like, actually that would use less space. And then you're like, I'll show you in 2 seconds why. It's like, yeah, that is better. Um, I'm totally on board. So what do we got in here? We've got a package JSON that's, our good old friend for getting our node modules. We add a lint config that we know is going to play nice. There's a whopping one dependency. We have some types from for doing TypeScript. If that's your gig, you don't have to use it. We find it's helpful in some cases. And let's see. So you have a public folder. The public folder is where static assets go. You can put whatever you want in there. We've just got some silly SVGs, and we generate a utility-based style system for you. And we actually end up inlining this in the head. If you're
Okay.
familiar with a Tailwind, it's like that. The difference between it and Tailwind is we recommend people try and use scales and create a responsive design based on breakpoints that are actually in your web components. We haven't written a lot about this yet, but if you embrace the utility style thing, you can max your CSS out at around 25 kilobytes, which is great because then you can inline it in the head and you don't have to worry about it growing because you're just using utility classes everywhere. And those get zeroed out by your CDN. So you'll always have the smallest possible style sheet while still adding and growing your HTML and your components. Some people don't like that. Some people find it hard to read. That's totally cool. It's CSS. You don't have to use ours. You could use your own. You could use Sass. You could do whatever you want. You could put it in that public folder. Happy days. We think there's really good reasons to embrace this way of working. And we think when you combine it with custom elements, there's actually a ton of benefits, especially in like CSS bloat. We've all been on that project where CSS file basically becomes this append only
Right.
thing where you're just like constantly adding importance and you're just building up this huge massive file and it becomes unmaintainable. So yeah, anyways, and then the last most important bit here would be there's an app folder. We too thought that was a cool idea. It has a pages folder. The pages folder works the way you would think. So if we added about.html, we would get a route for about.html. Yeah, let's do it. And just add some rando HTML. Yeah. So, and this is actually a good.
Oh wait.
Oh, yeah,
I forgot to. I'm not running the server.
All good.
So there's our about, and we go back to the home page. Ta-da!
So this is a thing. So now we have these two pages. We'd probably like to navigate between them. Wouldn't it be great to have a reusable navigation component of some kind?
Right.
So in your terminal, run begin gen page
Watch
and
this.
give it a path.
Okay, I'm in here, right? I'm gonna hit Control Z. Oh no, it doesn't work. Why isn't that working?
Oh,
Oh,
to background it?
I was going to background it, but it's not working. So I controlled seed. And now I'm going to do begin. And you said do which now?
Begin gen,
Gen.
J or GEN, yeah, page, and dash dash path, I think. And then, I don't know, do like, oh no, dash dash name, sorry. And then do like my dash header. Okay,
Page path not
that's
found.
terrible. Oh no, begin gen, sorry, begin gen element.
Oh,
I
all right.
hadn't had
Because we're
enough
making
coffee,
a
but this
shared
one,
element.
that's right. Yeah.
Okay. So we've got our
Okay.
shared element, and now the app folder has elements in it.
Yeah, and so like let's go take a look at my header. So this is just like the most generic basic element that you can get. In Enhance, you define custom elements as pure functions that receive an HTML tag template literal function, and then you return that HTML. And
Okay.
so that's a mouthful, but basically what you get here is a pure function. And when we render HTML on the back end, we're going to call these pure functions and render out your whatever your custom element is. So in here, since this is the header, let's add some markup to it where it's like got a couple of anchor tags, maybe like anchor to home and an anchor tag to about.
So we'll do
And
like
these are
a
just like, you know,
home, and that's gonna have an
yeah,
href of one of these, and we'll
yeah,
say like neat. And then we can
yeah.
have our nav, and our nav has, we'll grab this, get rid of the rel on it, and this one's gonna be home, and this one's gonna be about.
Yeah.
All right, and we can get rid of this one.
Yeah.
I want to talk about that state stuff though, because this looks cool.
Yeah. We'll get into that. It is cool.
Don't you argue with me, you HTML element. That's fine. It's helping. Okay, so now I've got this. This is working. I'm gonna leave that out for now, so it stops yelling at me. And
yeah.
on we go.
And
We've
we
got.
now want to go to about an index
Mm-hmm.
and add a my dash header.
Okay, so I'm
And
gonna
you can add
collapse the
this
styles. We've
wherever
got
makes
our.
sense.
And do you do it like that, or do you have to do full close?
You have to fully close them. And I don't know why, but I think there's a spec reason for this. This
Okay,
is
so
one
we
of the
got one of those in there. We'll
warts of
do
web
another one
development.
in here. And now I got to
Oh, got to
start the
kick the
server
dev server.
again. And now we've got,
Okay.
ta-da, look at
So,
it
and
go.
now no one's surprised or shocked, but view source on this and take a look at like what got rendered. And so, if you look at the source, this is what you wrote. And if we look for my header, we'll see that we've got the contents of that
Mm-hmm.
custom element rendered into the page. There's no client-side JavaScript running. So this is server-side expanding the elements and putting that markup in the page. And because we've also inlined all that CSS, we can put that in the page and you can have that custom element render without a flash of unstyled content. It's pretty great. Now, at this moment, if you wanted to, you could do a custom element define and register client-side code to take over.
Right,
But I don't think you need to, like this is just navigation. It
right.
doesn't really need JavaScript in this particular case. But it's nice to have that reusable header and to have only one place to work on that. And it's nice to have that encapsulation. And it's nice that it's pure and
Well, and I
isn't
think
adding any.
this is the thing that I think we've learned about just building for the web, right? Is that like the big lesson that we took away from Angular, React, et cetera, is that the component-based model is the current preferred way to build for the web, because no matter what framework emerges, components keep showing up as like the right way, and so being
Yeah.
able to do these in straight HTML is really nice, because now I'm getting that component-based model, that reusability, in a way that doesn't require me to run client-side JavaScript. And I think that piece is what I find particularly kind of enticing about this next wave of frameworks, is that we're getting to keep all the things I loved about JavaScript framework based, component based frameworks, and
Totally.
also gain these benefits of like, well, what if it was just built for the web though, and you didn't need all this extra stuff in the JavaScript to make it function? And I get to have my cake and eat it too. And I find that really refreshing and exciting.
This is also incredibly similar to how Zach's approaching webc with 11D. And
Mm,
so if for the folks following out there, if you haven't checked that out yet, please do. It's as far as static site generators go, like that's to me what that should look like. Like it just feels really right and natural and working close to the grain of the web. Um, so Zach started working on this roughly at the same time that we were doing all this enhanced business, where we basically had one of those like everybody's kind of realizing this at the same time, where we were all like, actually, you could render custom elements, and then JavaScript doesn't
mm,
need to run to
mm-hmm.
render HTML. And maybe that would work okay. And it turns out, yeah, it actually works really great. And there's nothing stopping us from adding JavaScript right now. We can still bring that to the party and make this header even better. But we don't have to start there, and we can just
Right.
get the thing working and get the basics in place, and then we can see like maybe this header needs a really kick-ass SVG animated hero logo, and maybe you want that to do something special when people interact with it with a mouse, and
Mm-hmm.
like that's a great time to bring JavaScript to the party. So another thing we can add here, let's create another custom element, and we can call it my dash debugger. So custom elements have to have a dash in them. That's why
Oh,
we're
okay.
doing this. It's kind
Okay.
of annoying. I sort of wish they didn't, but
That's like the name spacing to get away from potential future element conflicts.
yeah, it's an interesting hack. So custom elements are naturally namespaced and built-ins aren't.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we got this new element. Let's find out what this whole state thing's all about. Um, let's change that div, or actually just get rid of the divs and let's change that paragraph tag to a pre-tag.
Gotcha.
And I got to give a shout out to Ryan Florence every time I do this, but pre-tags are your like poor man's debugger. And so inside that pre-tag, let's add inside the JavaScript interpolation, let's add a JSON stringify, and we'll pass it state as the first argument, and then null as the second argument, and two as the third argument. I'll leave it as an exercise to the reader of why that we ended up with that. Just
I
how that
still
ended
don't.
up.
I still don't know.
So the two is how much we're going to indent it, and I can't remember what null's for,
Yeah,
but there's a
there's
reason.
something. Is it the serializer? I can't. Does it say
Something like that.
replacer?
Oh, it might say.
It's a replacer, so
Oh, you
you
can pass it a
can.
custom function. That's right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Okay.
because that's going to
Anyways,
come up all the time.
I know,
Anyways,
right? This.
so I like to throw my debugger at the bottom of the page, and this just makes life easier as you're developing. You're going to be able to see what's in that state object that gets passed around.
And we can throw it in the bottom of both here. Actually, let's do it like one of these. Okay, I have a question. You
Yeah.
in your index.html, you're not setting up the HTML, the body, the head. I did in
Right.
my about HTML. Should I have not done that?
Yeah, you should get rid of that. And
Okay.
and we have a special function for doing head, and then the body and all the rest of that
I
gets
gotcha.
reified for you.
Gotcha. Okay, so I'm in here. I've got my header, my debugger. I'm gonna reload, and down at the bottom we have our setup. If I go to my
Attributes and
about page,
store.
which is a little bit easier to read because it's all compact up here in the corner. I'll actually make that a little bit bigger. We've got our attributes in our
Yeah.
store. So
Okay.
what
Yeah.
happens? What
Go
do I
ahead.
do next? Like if I go
Okay.
in, I'm gonna try
Yeah,
something
add
and
some
see what
attributes to
happens.
my debugger.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah.
look at it go.
Amazing, right? So Booleans and attributes is a whole thing.
Sure.
And I don't know if we should get into any of this, but like at the end of the day, basically HTML, the spec, this isn't me, this isn't enhanced, this isn't how I would have designed it either. It's just how it ended up. But in HTML, the absence of values is considered falsy, and the presence of values is considered truthy. But even if you have just the first part of an attribute, so the name, that'll be considered truthy. And so that's a long way of saying we can't have nice things, and you've got to have fully realized string names, and you have to check for the string values. And I'm sorry it works that way. I know it shouldn't. Life's not fair. I don't know what else to say. It's just like it's a hard thing. We actually have a whole page in the enhanced docs about this where it feels like we're apologizing, but it's just like it's just how it works. There's nothing I can do. Like everything's a string. TypeScript's not going to save you. It's just how browsers work. It's yeah. Anyway, so attributes are a thing, and you can pass them on your elements. They're pretty good for simple things. You don't want to use them for heavy complex types. So if you have like typically our applications are going to have collections, and those collections are going to be full of objects or maps, and so they have arrays of objects. You don't want to put those in an attribute. That's just going to lead to a bad time. That's what the store is for. The attributes are more for just like switches and values. And so the store is now interesting. How do we populate that store? So when we first started doing this, we did this really like kind of elaborate reach around with WebSockets, and then we started to develop what we called API routes, and we actually went for the simpler thing. So API routes in Enhance are just like pages, where you define functions on a file-based routing path, and they return JSON values. If we have a matching API route to a matching page route, we'll automatically populate the store with those JSON values for you.
Gotcha.
So that's a lot of words. So let's jump into the terminal, and we can do begin gen API, and I think it's path, but just type help, and we can see. Oh yeah, you could do that too. We can just try it. So begin
Path.
gen, path.
You were right.
So path, and then let's say about, so that we can just try this out.
Okay.
And we'll jump over to the API route. And so here's the cloud function. And actually, now that that exists, I think if we just refresh the about page, we should see.
Oh, I got to restart it again.
All right.
Nope.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
all right.
Now your pure function got that data, and you could do things with it. And none of this ran on the client. This all ran on the server side. So this is a really nice convenience for people that are doing progressive enhancement. You can get your first render with your data cleanly without having to do an extra request. And then once the JavaScript kicks in on the client, you can do further requests for data on that same path and update your client however you choose. And that's how you get state. We don't just support get either. So your API routes can export functions for post and patch and delete. So you could do a full REST endpoint here if you wanted to.
I gotcha. So for any of those that you want to do, it would just be like export async function post, and then do post stuff.
And like all credit where it's due, this is very similar to how Remix works. They call it actions and loaders. We call it get and post.
Right. And does yours support like patch, put, delete, stuff like that?
It does, and options. Should you want to do all that?
Like if and options is a big one because you got it. Like the core stuff is such a pain if you don't have that.
Yes, that's a whole thing. And actually, if you want to get a peek into the request of the object, in your return on line 11 there, you could just pop a key request or rec, and it should just reflect that back. Yeah, there it goes. And so now you can, you have everything at this point. You've got the entire request object. This is all based on AWS Lambda. So
Hmm.
we just pass that straight through to you, the exact same style of parameters. And you can do with this as you will. Most of the time, the only thing people are going to be interested in here will be cookies or session.
Hmm.
But it can be helpful to grab like query string values or parameter path values, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and this is like, I've been playing a lot with using cookies for things. You can see I've got some of my other local dev stuff. I've been playing
I
with
like that edge function theme switcher. That was
yeah,
dope.
yeah. For folks who haven't seen that, I just wrote a post on how to get away from the flash of inaccurate color, um, which is what Chris Coyer has dubbed fart, and that
Fart.
actually.
Yes.
So the thing that's really funny and upsetting about that is it's now been referenced in the spec. So it's like an
Oh my
actual
God.
name of the thing as canonized by the W3C at this point. So
That's
thanks,
perfect. I love
Chris.
that. Though, we can't take ourselves too seriously. I think that's fantastic. That's exactly what we need. Yeah, so you get everything in these API routes. That's
Hmm.
fun. This is obviously very raw and low level business here. So like you're
Right.
you're working at the level of the request and response, and you're writing just pure HTML and pure JavaScript.
Hmm.
There's no transpiling step going on. This is all interpreted at runtime. Next question people typically ask is like, "Oh, isn't that slow?" No, it's not. We were able to render 20K elements in like 100 milliseconds. Turns out HTML is pretty fast. And if
Yep.
you add cache control headers on top of this, it will be indistinguishable from a static site. Yeah, so pretty good. The next thing to try out here, we'll take this to 11. Why don't we try the Rails style generator? And I'm going to apologize in advance because there's a chance this doesn't work, but hopefully it does. I've had bugs here. We're still
And
working on it. It's
I
early
just saw a
days.
comment too that we can keep it running in one terminal, and then I've opened a second one to run the generator, and it should just pick it all up
Genius.
for us.
I hope so. Okay, that's cool. So I never remember what these arguments are, and I've been doing Rails since it came out. But if you do begin, help, gen, scaffold, I think, or any
Uh,
order of those parameters. Yeah, scaffold help, that'll work too.
okay, so the
Right.
scaffold.
Yeah. That's it.
Whoa.
So just copy paste that line.
All right, we're gonna do
So
this one.
yeah, just copy paste that. So like this is the Rails uh, thing. And this will take a second because we got to install the AWS SDK. I really wish we didn't need that to do this, but we do. Oh, man, your internet's fast.
Yes.
Right on. So that just generated a ton of stuff. Let's go take a look at like how it works before I talk about this code because there's just so much of
Yeah.
it. Um,
Oh,
jump over
this set
to
up like a whole page for me.
It did. It set up a page, it set up routes, it set up all kinds of cool stuff. So we got a books page,
Wow. Okay.
and now we can do the full CRUD thing with the book. So,
Okay.
you might want to
So
put in
let's sunny
man,
nihilism.
man. I was going to say management for the rest of us, but yeah,
Oh,
funny
that's
nihilism.
a good one. Okay, so yeah, let's actually, you know what?
I
I'm
actually
totally
liked
gonna do
yours
that.
though. I
Here it
think
is. This
everybody
is
should buy this book. I just bought it.
it is an
And
incredibly good
I
book.
bought
Yes.
a copy for a friend right away.
All right, I'm
It's
gonna
not often we
close
get good
this.
timeless knowledge in this industry, but I think
Yes,
Sarah pulled it off.
Sarah is definitely one of those people who just gets it. And this is a 2022 book. All right, so we'll save it, and now we
Hey,
got a book.
got a
Dang.
book,
All right. Okay, and we can go to
and
edit.
you'll notice that like yeah, you could edit it. That reloaded the whole page too, like a
Mm-hmm.
savage. You were just posting a
Like a
form, and it.
savage.
So we could progressively enhance this if we wanted to, but I think that whole request response cycle probably completes within 100 milliseconds. So you really got to
Mm-hmm.
ask yourself if you're adding anything or if you're just wasting time. So let's go take a peek at the code that got generated here because there's quite a bit going on now.
Yes.
Rails, like this was the thing with Rails. It gave you so much speed out of the box.
Mm-hmm.
Normally, like setting up a database CRUD app is it's a lot of work. There's a whole bunch of stuff that has to happen. We need a route for each of the create, read, update, and deletes. We need a database. We need a schema for that database. It's just it's a ton of work. So the scaffold thing isn't going to give you production ready, going to scale massively code, but it's going to give you that first cut. And then
Right.
you can go in there and start playing with it and making it better. Under the hood, this uses Lambda for the compute and DynamoDB for the database. So
Got
it
it.
actually would scale really, really far.
Mm-hmm.
And that too is a double-edged sword. We were being DDoSed a couple of years ago, and we didn't find out until we saw the bill basically at the end of the month. And
Yeah.
it's because serverless worked. It just scaled right up. And
I
we were
mean,
like,
that's
oh my God, what's
it,
going on?
this is one of the things, like I have really become like a diehard serverless fan because we did this thing at the beginning of the pandemic, the COVID-19 tracking project. Aaron Kassane and a group started
Cool.
working on
Nice.
that, and
Yeah.
they built it at Netlify, and like a lot of their database was API data that they were scraping, and then they would serve it serverlessly. So it was a serverless function that would return the data from the API. And they went from like 0 to 2 million uniques pretty much overnight. And the only reason
Yeah.
they knew is they saw the analytics.
And honestly, there's a chance that 2 million uniques was still in the free tier for the most part.
Definitely could have
Probably
been.
not for the database stuff, but for the compute side, it's vanishingly cheap. It's
Right.
like, yeah, $2 for the first, I think, 2 million, and then 10
Mm-hmm.
cents for every million after that. So sub $10 anyways for the
Yeah.
compute. The data can get expensive. The data is
Mm-hmm.
expensive and hard. So like that's understandable to me. If you have a big Dynamo bill, you probably have a valuable service, and you
We
probably
would
could afford
certainly
that.
hope so.
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, so cool. Let's take a look around. So pages are just HTML usually, but they can also
Mm-hmm.
be a custom element. And in this case, they are because we're dealing with state. You're going to want to have, some imperative logic. So in this case, it's enhanced page container, and then it's just got a really basic map. We're not doing anything special in here. There's no syntax that doesn't run in Node natively. So like this is literally just getting that state, looping over the books, and then pumping out the markup for those books. And it gets that state from a companion API route. So at /books, we'll have a get function somewhere that's going to be pulling those books out of the database and then populating that in the JSON response that comes back ultimately to show this page.
And so this is doing
And
something that we haven't seen yet, for folks who are maybe looking at web components for the first time or haven't gotten very deep. We passed in all of this HTML as an argument to the page container.
yeah, 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 and that is slightly different. So this page itself is a custom element, and I think actually if you even look in the view source of the rendered output, you'll see that there's like a wrapper element around all of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, page
Yeah,
books, and
page
then we've
books.
got the page container.
And then it just unravels all that or expands all that markup for you dynamically at runtime, and you get the resulting HTML, which is quite
Right.
nice.
Yeah, no, this is great. And so then we've got the books itself, which is the edit form.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks like this is also handling our post, which is that's cool. So we just submit it to itself.
Yep, that's it.
And all right, so I want to poke into the generated code here. So books itself is getting into our models. So we didn't look at models yet. Should we look at those first, or?
Well, we can take a look at this first and then look at the
Okay.
model. So this is a pattern that we keep seeing. If you wanted to, you could just write straight up Dynamo calls in here.
Mm-hmm.
But that gets really ugly, and like now your code's gonna like have all this Dynamo all over it. Like I don't want to run a dynamo.query, I want to get books. And so
Mm-hmm.
adding that meaningfulness to it by encapsulating it as a model is nice. The other thing that's nice is won't be exposing my HTTP business logic with my database logic. And so when we're dealing with an HTTP request, we're often pulling off keys from session, munging data somehow, usually
Mm-hmm.
doing some kind of auth step. And so you don't want to mix that up with your database business. So this ends up being really, really quite lean. There's not a lot going on here. It's like, okay, if there's any problems, we're on request.session.problems, we're going to display those. And this is a bit of a weird pattern that front-end devs might not be used to, but when you are posting forms across pages and there's an error, you have to return those errors somehow to the original page. And often when we
Mm-hmm.
do a post, we want to follow it up with a 302 or a 303 redirect.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no way to pass that state unless we put it in the session.
Got
We call that problems because they're not errors. They're like, like you spelled something wrong, or maybe you didn't meet like a password length requirement or something like that. So on line 16, or sorry, 14 there, we're pulling the problems off of the session. We're pulling the book off of the session, and then we're rewriting the session without either of those things on line 16, and we're passing the problems through the JSON response. So that's a little bit of
it.
a it's a little bit of a long-winded description for what's happening, but the reason why you want to do that, when we display a form with problems, we don't want that to stay there forever. We only want to show you those problems after you had them. So we pull them off of the session and we rewrite the session on the way out. This is not natural. We're used to having everything in the browser state, but now
Mm-hmm.
you got to think about state in the browser and the server and crossing the boundary between pages. And session is your tool to do that. And it absolutely introduces some complexity, but it gives you a lot of power as well. So
This is it's funny because I know that everybody keeps making the call back to PHP, but in my
yes,
PHP days, I remember writing this kind of code where you
yeah,
had to create a session and then you're putting stuff in and plucking it out so that you're making sure that the right state hits the right places at the right times,
yeah,
and that is very like you're right. I do think there's a reason that people turned away from PHP towards some of the browser only implementations of this. But the thing, it seems like the reasons to doing that gap is narrowing, and
yeah, and
with a
it's
little
like
bit of like DX syntactic sugar, this becomes just a thing that will get done for you
yeah,
by the framework. So I think this is the part where for anybody who's looking at this going like, well, this is way harder than just building it as an SPA. You're right, but that's by design. We need to feel out how these patterns work with the tools that we
yeah,
have today, and then we'll build the polish on top of it.
exactly. And I think as soon as you get a database involved, you'll have a session. As
Yeah,
soon as you have forms, you'll have one. So like it's just sort of a necessary complexity. And
yeah,
the other frameworks will have these affordances built into. Might
absolutely.
not be obvious at first, but Remix has a session. So
Hmm.
does Astro.
Hmm.
It's just
And
another knife in your boot. It's not one you have to use, but you'll
and I just
probably
want to
use one.
clarify, chat. I don't think you sound like that when you talk. Um, all right. So what do we want to do from here? Where should we go look next? Or I guess we've got more. We've got
Yeah.
our post function
Well,
down
yeah,
here.
let's check out the post. So the post does very similar things. We are encouraging folks to create a separate path for validation. So reading, writing, updating, talking to your database is a
Hmm.
separate activity from validating user input. You do need to do both, but you probably want to have that business logic not mixed up. So we've got this little validate.create, and if it finds any problems, we pop those on the session and we redirect back to the books form. If there are no problems, then we're going to try and do an upsert here. And if it's good, then we just redirect back to books. It's going to do a fresh query on the books page, and it's going to write out those books
Got
into
it.
the yeah.
And an
And
upsert
that's
for
it.
anybody who's never heard that term before is when you either update or insert. If the book exists, you update whatever changed. If it doesn't exist, you create a new entry with it. It's a portmanteau of update and insert.
Yes, and it's a handy pattern. I mean, it isn't always. correct, but I think
Hmm.
it works in trivial cases. So like if you get into more dynamic data, eventually you're going to have to update individual attributes on that data, and you
Hmm.
won't want to do these wholesale create or update things. But like
Right.
a lot of, and this is just a life cycle thing. Like if I'm using a database for short-lived access tokens, for example, I'm going to create a magic link for logging in, for example, and I'm going to have a token that expires in 10 seconds. Upsert's dope for that. The parameters don't
Hmm.
change. There's no situation where all I need to update is probably a refresh or a
Hmm.
timeout.
Hmm.
Um, a user account where I've got a first name, last name, and like birthday, and like a bunch of stuff that might change. Now at that point, Upsert's probably not as useful. You're probably going to want to have a discrete way of doing it. Oh yeah, Trout Soda, totally Rails Flash. It's back. So every framework has to brand session in its own special way, and in Rails they like to call it the Flash. I remember being deeply confused about that. I'm like, this isn't Flash. Anyways, um, now
um,
no one cares.
yeah. Okay, so we've got a post, and then if we look in here, we've got this other set around the books itself. So this is a pattern that we've seen before, where we've got the name of the route, like /books, but then we also have these placeholders for ID, so that can be the specific key of the book.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, and we ripped this off a remix. There was a lot of bike shedding around this. So in Architect, we had path parameters or colon. We took that from Express,
mhm,
but colons in file names has a whole bunch of problems. So
mhm,
does $signs, it turns out, but it felt the least problematic.
mhm.
We definitely don't want to end up in a situation where we have a programming language embedded in our file-based routing. I think
Right.
there's a lot of people experimenting with that right now, and it's probably
Yes.
not going to work out super well. So we decided there's two use cases as far as we're concerned. It's parameterizing parts of a URL and giving them meaningful names. And so that's what we're doing with the $ID. We're saying, in this part of the URL, we're going to pull that piece out dynamically when the route matches and give that to you as the name ID. And
Mhm.
that's handy because then we can do, lookups based on path parts. The
Right.
other pattern is greedy catchalls,
Mhm.
and we decided to call that dollar bill. If you look in our documentation, it's just $2 instead of one. And those are good for the end of a URL. So they're very greedy. They're going to capture everything. And you really don't want to use these unless you super need to. Otherwise, you're going to end up writing a router inside of your router.
Mm.
And that's a real yo dog situation. And you don't need to get yourself into that situation. It's got built-in routing. Use it the most you can. And then like if you absolutely need to like get a full path part, then use a catch-all at the end.
The, yeah,
Yeah.
this has been my experience with catch-alls is it's when I'm building something that is absolutely more complex than it needs to be. And I have looked myself in the
I
mirror,
mean,
and I've stared into my
yeah.
own soul, and I've said, you know what, I'm okay with that.
Uh, it's just a thing like we did a fancy route where it was going to reach into an S3 bucket and pull out
Hmm.
files.
Hmm.
And we never knew how deeply nested that file path would be. It could be in like a whole bunch of folders. And so like that's the perfect moment to use a catch-all. When you've got a catch-all and you find yourself parsing the URL for meaning, that's when it's like there's going to be
It's
a
time.
bug.
You just got to be like, all right, self, is this who we really want to
Yes.
be?
Yes. Do I want to be writing a router inside the router? Yeah. Changing the semantics of how this might work. Yeah. So it's an avoidable pain point if you can.
Yes.
But it is handy and you do need it sometimes. So it's
It's
there
a
for you when
it,
you need
it falls into a category of programming and really of just like life in general that I've started referring to as voluntary suffering, where
it.
for the sake of principles or interest or chasing something that was interesting, you opt into a category of pain that was definitely not required.
In the Rails community, I think we would call this it's a knife. but the handle is also a knife. So it's a very useful feature. You got to be really careful with it because you're going to cut yourself. I don't know, like like named path parameter parts are like almost 99% of the time what you want. And if you stick to that, then you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's catch all routes. That's probably also the most advanced feature. We really
Mm-hmm.
quickly kind of drop off into simple boilerplatey stuff from here. So we've got the create and read, and then on the ID path, or when you're viewing it, you would get a book probably,
Right.
and then we'd probably just reuse the upsert for the post. I'm
Right. Looks
guessing.
like this is validate.update and then upsert.
Oh
Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
mine 47 or whatever. So that's cool. And then I guess the final boss to our CRUD app would be the delete. And this follows all the same conventions where we've got sort of the
Mm-hmm.
Rails flashy thing going on and deletes the book. But yeah, 30 lines of code, not too
That's
bad to get started.
pretty excellent. And so
Yeah.
we've got about 4-ish minutes before I'm going to start tearing us
Oh,
down. But we've got.
okay.
Was there anything you wanted to show for sure before we wrap?
I think that was all the major hits. They could go to the website and dig in further, or join our Discord, or hassle me on Twitter, or find me on Mastodon.
Great. All right. We'll do a round of
Yeah.
links at the end. We've got a
Yeah.
couple questions. So
Okay.
Dev is asking about the choice in organization, right? So there's a technical separation between elements, pages, API models, events, and this is a
Yeah.
kind of a horizontal split by type as opposed to a vertical split by feature or slices. What made, I guess, how did you make the decision of going over like, here is my books folder with all the pieces inside of it versus here are all the different components and there's a books piece in each one of them?
Yeah, you can reorganize this stuff how you see fit. We're not militant about that. It actually is all configurable under the hood.
Oh,
I
okay.
don't agree that one way is better than the other. I think they're just different ways. And I don't agree that one's maintainable and one's not. I've worked in large code bases that have strong conventions not based on feature, and I've worked in ones that do. And they both have benefits and drawbacks. And
Mm-hmm.
ones that have strong generic um, hierarchy in the file system structure, I find personally a little easier to navigate when I move between projects. So yeah, this architect project and this other one don't have the same domain. But if I'm looking for a route, I know where that is. If I'm looking for a model, I know where that is. So, there's trade-offs. Like I might not know what the domain name is for a feature or the particular expertise of what those things are. So, but the grouping thing is honestly, it's more aesthetics to me than practical. But there are escape hatches for you to reorganize this how you see fit.
Mm. Yeah, and I would kind of agree that like my experience of file structure is that file structure itself is not what makes something maintainable. The
Yeah,
thing that makes something maintainable is the team having the right set of agreements and like social dynamics on how they manage things and being consistent
totally,
about it. Because
absolutely.
I've definitely seen some who buddy stuff going on with like the naming was so very carefully bike shedded over and everybody was very very sure that this was perfect, and then the very first day somebody just like YOLOs something that technically follows the naming convention but is absolutely not in the spirit of why it was the way it is, and it's like, oh, this is no longer useful. Like right out of the gate we've immediately blown this whole thing up.
I kind of yeah, and like I feel like we were really spoiled in the Rails days by having strong conventions, and we
Mm,
sort of lost that in the last few years. And like any Rails developer can move between any Rails projects and be productive pretty much immediately, and that's a effectively unheard of capability between React projects,
it
between same version of the React frameworks that are out there. Like moving between them requires understanding the domain of how that thing was organized, as opposed to understanding the system that was being used to generate the organization.
it's
It's a
very interesting to me seeing because there are very good reasons to do both, right? Like
yeah,
convention of like everybody does everything the same way. It leads to I would sometimes a little bit of like things become overwrought when they don't need to be. And so you're like, but it would be great if this was all just one file. Somebody just shared Dan
Oh,
Abramov's
I
like
love that one.
ideal thing
We
where
hear
it's
that
just
all the
one
time.
file, right? And so I love that. I love the idea of like, yeah, it's a little simple app, just do whatever you want. But there's definitely a threshold beyond which you're like, it's like we needed some organizational structure, and everybody inventing their own organizational structure for every project has a huge amount of drawbacks. So there's this like bloat up front for like manageability later versus like do whatever you want, but now you really have to do it all yourself. And I don't know what the right answer is, because I think the right answer, like all things, is it depends. And the thing that I always love is like I will think about one of these problems and I will like I'll feel like I've reached a decision. I'm like, for me, this is the right way to do it, and I'll immediately invalidate. Like next project, I'll be like, nope, that was the exception. This is not going to work.
I mean, and that's probably fine, right? Like we're all still learning, hopefully, and there's just going to be trade-offs. That I love the whole single file thing. We get that feedback all the time. I just want to put this all in one file, and I'm like, you don't though. Like you're going to hit a point where you're going to really want a second file. Like you're not going to want to put all that logic in one place, but you do want to have things that make sense to be kind of logically grouped, and it's just this constant thing. There's a Wikipedia page about this. It's called the law of triviality, and I recommend everybody look it up and internalize this and ask yourself if you're invoking the law of triviality when you bring something up during a code review, because chances are you are, and you shouldn't do that because it's toxic.
All right, so we've got about 3 minutes left, and I want to make sure we've got enough time to go through all the resources. So we're in the docs. We've shared the docs. Where else should someone go if they want to dig in and start working with Enchane?
We're all kicking it on Discord these days, so I think that is probably the other main place. And then I think you find our Discord. I thought it was top right, but maybe not. Let me see. That's hilarious. It used to be in the top right.
It was on the homepage.
Search for it.
I'll drop the link from here.
Oh yeah, it's in the right-hand bar of most pages where it says community, GitHub, Discord.
Oh, do I have it? Am I like too? Yes, I collapsed it too much. There you go.
There you go. Yeah.
So we've got the Discord here.
We're there a lot.
Where else? Anywhere else?
Pretty great. No, GitHub and Discord. Those are the main places. And I'm on Twitter still, probably. Hit me up there.
For as long as it stays up, we're going down with this ship.
Yeah, man. I mean, I love that service. It's horrible to see it being done so dirty.
Well, but fingers crossed. This is the dark before the dawn, right? We'll see how it goes. But we've got Twitter, we've got the docs, we've got GitHub, we've got Discord. You got lots of places to go and check out Enchane. I am going to give one more shout out to our captioning. We've had Diane with us all day, taking all this down. Thank you so much. That's made possible by our sponsors, Netlify, NX, New Relic. Thank you so much for kicking in, making the show more accessible to more people, and helping me keep the lights on. I appreciate that very much. While you're checking out things on the site, make sure you go and take a look at the schedule, because we got all sorts of good stuff coming. You can follow on Twitch if you're watching now. That'll let you know when things are coming. You can add on Google Calendar so that you get a thing on your calendar that shows where each episode is happening. Or you can follow on YouTube, where we just got our handle. So now you can go to @LearnWithJason on YouTube. With that, y'all, what a great episode. Brian, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. This was a blast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Also want to say thanks for sending me this little buddy.
Yeah, we got a corgi duck on the stream. Okay.
Yes, I meant to pull him out, but we didn't have any major bugs, so
that's like bittersweet, right? Like we got the corgi ducks on standby for debugging, and then no bugs.
But Christmas is coming. Buy these for your loved ones. This won me major points. So actually, I had to steal it back.
Thank you for the plug. I very much appreciate that. Marissa will be very happy if y'all buy these corgi ducks, because I still have hundreds of them.
That's funny.
All right, y'all. With that, we're going to call this one a success. Thank you so much. We're going to go find somebody to raid. Brian, thank you. We will talk to you all next time.